dear friends, it is a privilege to send greetings to everyone attending tonight's program sponsored by SAGEVets and the New York State Division of Veterans Services. There are an estimated 100,000 members of the armed forces who were discharged between World War II and 2011 because of their sexual orientation. For decades, veterans have suffered from discriminatory policies such as don't ask, don't tell. Tonight, the personal stories shared highlight the need to ensure that our veterans receive the recognition and benefits they earned for their sacrifices they have made for our country. I am grateful for our nation's veterans. Their service reminds us of the values, lessons, and ideals that will build a stronger future for our nation. Please accept my wishes for a wonderful event and for many more years of continued success. Sincerely, Kirsten Gillibrand, United States Senator. So without
awesome.
further ado, it is awesome. Yes,
yeah,
Kristen.
and great work, Ashton.
Thank you.
That she sent that in.
It is, and it's rather perfect and well-fitting because, as we know, Senator Gillibrand is the sponsor for Restore Honor to Service Members Act, which is federal legislation that is designed to clear discriminatory records of service members who were discharged due to their sexual orientation. And Kristen is here with us and is one of our guest hosts today from the New York State Division of Veterans Services. Many of you know Ms. Rouse, President and founder of the New York City Veterans Alliance, board member of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, and also the Deputy Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the New York State Division of Veterans Services. She has served as both non-commissioned officer and commissioned officer in the U.S. Army Reserve, and Army National Guard for more than 25 years. She served in Afghanistan in 2006, 2010, and 2012. Kristen has also been featured in multiple media outlets and journals, sharing perspective about all issues relating to veterans and accessing veterans services. A huge player here in this space. I'm Ashton Stewart. I'm the manager of SAGEVets, the New York State program for older LGBT veterans, and I'm a combat veteran from the First Gulf War. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be here with you and with Kristen and to share all of this information with you this evening and some of the stories from the veterans that we're serving. So thank you so much to all of you who've taken time out of your day to be part of this program. So there's a lot going on here. This is part one of a two-part program. Because there is so much information that can be shared about this history, we thought we'd break it apart into two pieces. We've got the pre-Don't Ask, Don't Tell section and Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which will be today. And then for part two, which is going to be on December 22nd, celebrating and marking the anniversary of the signing of the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We are going to talk about the future and also a little bit about how that history happened and what happened after Don't Ask, Don't Tell ended and how the military has changed. So getting back to the pre-Don't Ask, Don't Tell, racism, discrimination, homophobia, and a lack of understanding around post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health conditions has clouded so many military decisions for discharges. So today we're going to focus on some of that history surrounding the evolution of LGBT policy in the US military and how just discharges that are less than honorable that were based on anti-LGBT policies have impacted veterans' health and wellness. So we're going to begin between, just like I said, Kirsten Gillibrand already mentioned that there were over 100,000 discharges between World War II and the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The reason that they start at that point with the end of World War II is because people weren't getting kicked out during the war, which is historically traditional for the military because when they need bodies, they sort of overlook discriminatory practices. The discriminatory practices for LGBT people go all the way back to Valley Forge with Ensign Enslin, who was booted out for being gay while he was serving under William von Steuben. And Gay Purges, it's also been a mechanism used by the military to rid anyone who was not cisgender or straight from the military. And the first recorded case or example of a gay purge was in 1919, and it was approved by none other than FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He's often rated by scholars as one of the world's greatest US presidents. And in 1919, while he was Assistant Secretary of the Navy at the time, he approved this operation that became known as the Newport Sex Scandal. So what it can be described as is this: there were 13 sailors who were chosen for their youth and good looks, who were dispatched to entrap other sailors and civilians. They were working with the military to trap these sailors, and they submitted daily detailed logs about sex that they were engaging in with these sailors. And in the ensuing 3 weeks that followed, 17 sailors were court-martialed and charged with sodomy and salacious conduct. Most were sentenced to 5 to 6 years in prison. And when the public got wind of this, including a local religious official who was implicated in the scandal, there was a huge uproar in the local newspapers. Nobody could believe that the military would be involved in such a scandal. And there was so much blowback, and there was denial, of course, from the government, but it brought so much attention that it ended up going to the Republican Senate subcommittee. They held hearings in 1920 about this. And at that time, FDR was a Democratic vice presidential nominee, and they condemned the probe. They recommended that the offending sailors be hospitalized instead of imprisoned. And that sounds like a positive outcome. However, this was the last time that not only the federal government would condemn a purge of homosexuals in the military for the next 70 years, but it also marks the beginning of the military treating homosexuality as a mental deficit rather than a crime. So after that, between 1941 and 45, we needed more bodies for World War II. We needed 16 million soldiers, as a matter of fact. So in 1945, the Army was facing manpower shortages during the final European offensive, when Secretary of War Harry Stimson ordered a review of all discharges of homosexuality during the previous 2 years and encouraged the reinduction of gay soldiers who had not committed in-service homosexual acts. So again, we're seeing two sides here within the same entity of the US military. So this continued and lasted. These gay purges, also known as witch hunts, lasted well through the 1980s. And Kristen has actually written about some of this history. And Kristen, could you pick up from that point and talk a little bit about what was going on in the 1980s?
Sure. I mean, and so, and also thank you so much, Ashton, for your partnership on this and for all the work that you do, and to everyone at SAGE. Thank you for the vital work that you have done and that you continue to do. I mean, through a lot of really challenging times for LGBTQ people broadly, but also military folks and veterans. It's gotten better. But as we're discussing, we have such a long and specific history of exclusion from the military, and this has caused so much pain, so much disappointment, feelings of betrayal for so many people who really just wanted nothing other than to serve our country. And so to look back on the code of codifying the anti-homosexual policy around World War I, which you're talking about, and on through that in the 1950s, where really it's person by person, where people are being sought out, dragged out, interrogated, forced to sign, in many cases, bad paper discharges, denied a lifetime of benefits and recognition, told that that at that time, in the 1950s, they changed it to an undesirable discharge, and that word undesirable has haunted people for a lifetime, for decades. And and so just acknowledging any of you on this call who experienced that, and the difficulty in getting those discharges changed, and that's something that we'll talk more about. But in the 1970s, again, to Ashton's point, during a time of war, when you're drafting people, is not the time that we're putting folks out for for who they are. you want all hands on deck. And so, in the 1970s, we saw Leonard Matlovich come out on the cover of, I think it was Time magazine, saying, "I am gay." Perry Watkins, told his command, listen, I'm gay, I'm a drag queen, but I'm proud of my service. And, and both of them were pioneers in fighting the discharge that they were given. And Perry Watkins even fought it up until the 80s. And so where he stayed in and he got his benefits and he got his honorable discharge because of all the court cases, but they were treated as one-offs. It wasn't a matter of policy, but during the 80s, was a time that, folks were being, coerced. I've worked with veterans who've told me that, this is, to me, what I think is a worst case scenario is, somebody was assaulted and told to stay quiet, or he'd be outed as gay. And, and that's something that haunts you for a lifetime as well. And, and so looking at just how, it's not a clear cut thing of like, oh, you're gay, you're out. There's so much that gets wrapped up into it. And sometimes it's, more things that just get piled on. And so, or somebody may go AWOL to escape, a situation that they can't fully disclose. I mean, it's, it caused so much adverse, behavior and lifelong trauma for so many people. But looking at just the numbers of people who were discharged, in 1992, there was a RAND study that was conducted looking at, looking back on the policy of forcing people out. And it was a study determined that it cost United States taxpayers more than $500 million between 1982 and 1992 to put people out only for the fact of their identity. $500 million. That's a fair bit of money by 1980s, early 90s standards. And so, even as the DoD and our federal government knew that it was wildly expensive, this policy continued, and and it morphed into what we came to know as "Don't Ask, Don't Tell." Looking at and this is also where I know Ashton, like this is where both of our personal stories start too. In terms of our own military service, as Ashton mentioned, my own service, has spanned more than 25 years. In 1994 was when I first enlisted, and and this was when I was a young, very cognizant of young lesbian. I knew I came out at age 19. And that was a painful process, because of my own family background, and it can be so traumatic for people to come out even now, but as as a self-aware out lesbian at this time, I remember clearly, back in 1992. When this was before I was really even thinking seriously about signing up for the military, but I remember the news story of a sailor named Alan Schindler, who was murdered by one of his own shipmates for being gay, and and that was something that just caused it was focused national media attention. It was a major focus of gay news. And so, like the gay community, the LGBTQ community was definitely paying attention to this. And I remember going to the 1993 March on Washington. It was a time when, of hope for progressive change after years of, like the extended Reagan era, and and the idea that Bill Clinton coming into office would represent, some new change for progressive social change. But the 1993 March on Washington, I remember, that was one of my formative events as a young gay person. And and that it just seemed like everything was going to change. The military was going to open to everybody. The gay marriage, we were on the brink of gay marriage. We were on the brink of so much, of employment non-discrimination, of federal laws and federal change that would protect us and recognize us as equal people, who shouldn't, at a minimum, shouldn't be fired for who we are. We shouldn't be denied basic partnership and marriage rights, based on who we are. And I remember thinking about that and like, we are on the brink of change. But, even after this horrific murder of Alan Schindler, and like, okay, the military knows that something has to be done. And this was also like just a couple of years after the tailhook scandal, where the military realized, we have to have a zero tolerance policy for sexual harassment and assault, and so we're taking all this stuff really seriously now. And so, so in 1993, the compromise, so like Ashton and I were talking before this, but it was really, as soon as the Clinton administration started talking about opening up the military to LGBT folks, there was such pushback. There was such pushback by the military. There was such pushback by the entire national security apparatus, by conservative media, by a lot of the religious community, like all of this stuff, all this pushback. But so the compromise, that the forward progress that we thought would happen was don't ask, don't tell. So the policy would change where, okay, we're not going to automatically put you out because we're not even going to ask you. We're not going to ask you anymore on the intake form, like when you sign up at MEPS. We're not going to ask you anymore if you've ever engaged in homosexual conduct. We're gonna take that question out, and so nobody has to lie when they come into the military, but you're just not allowed to disclose who you are. And so I remember thinking like, I could do that. I could do that. I would be honored to serve my country. I can, I'm in a place where I want something better for myself as a young person. And I don't have to lie. I see there's progress, and I know that more progress is coming. I know that there's a wave behind this of LGBTQ activism and a community. Like, America's changing. This is going to change. And so I was ready by 1994 to sign up for the Army, but I didn't sign up for active duty because I was worried about that non-disclosure part. But so I signed up for the reserve, and I signed up in 1994. And when I went to the military entrance processing station to the MEPS in Jacksonville, Florida, in April of 1994, the question on the intake form, there's the question, who are you? What's your medical history? Have you ever, asking you about your consumption of illegal drugs? And then right beneath that was the question about, have you ever engaged in homosexual conduct? And it was blacked out in a marker. So the policy when I signed up in 1994 was that new, that it was blacked out in marker. And so, so that was when I got to sign up, and I felt like, okay, I have to sign all these papers saying I understand what don't ask, don't tell is. I understand that even though gay marriage isn't yet a thing, if I ever got gay married, that would be a disclosure of who I am. And so that was prohibited. So actually, gay marriage, before it was even legal in any state in the country, it was actually defined by the DADT as something that you weren't allowed to do if you wanted to stay in the military. And so, it seemed like a decent idea at the time. And it ended up lasting 17 more years after I signed up.
That is one of the main things that you said there, Kristen. Thank you so much for sharing your personal story and thoughts about this experience. One of the key words that you mentioned here is equal, and that's all we're looking for is equality. You shouldn't be judged by who you love. You shouldn't be judged because you don't fit into the cisgender straight category. most of the people, including yourself, are dedicated soldiers. The people I've met through this program are so dedicated, and it's such a loss to hear some of the stories about people actually getting discharged because of sexual orientation or having a secondary issue related to the discrimination that they were facing. And you mentioned Alan Schindler, who was murdered by his own crew for being suspected as gay. They didn't even know for certain.
Yeah.
But this whole culture that was created here of the discriminatory policies of allowing people to discriminate against LGBT people, homosexuals at the time in that era, just that is what really alters the cohesion and military readiness. Because if you can't trust who you are serving with, how are you going to be able to fight collectively? I want to open the floor here for some questions. If anybody has any questions thus far in this conversation, please post them in the chat. For those of you that were just now joining us, I mentioned earlier that we did have to keep the cameras and the microphones off just because of the high number of people that are joining us today. But we are recording this, so your comments will be archived as part of the chat. So by all means, and as we carry on here, the secondary issues that I'm mentioning about the discriminatory policies, if even don't ask, don't tell. I mean, the fact that you couldn't be open about who you are, you did have a little bit more integrity as an option by not talking about it. But it's hypocritical. I mean, the name "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" is just such hypocrisy.
Absolutely, and we all know, I mean, that it ended up being a very harmful policy, and people were asking, people were pursuing. There were, frivolous investigations, and like the witch hunts did continue, and and under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, also people of color were disproportionately impacted by this discriminatory policy as well. And so, and even in, in 1999, there was the case of Barry Winchell, who was, a soldier at Fort Campbell, and he was dating a trans woman who he had met at a local club, and so he was, because he was dating a trans woman, his own unit members beat him severely and murdered him. And again, like this is, this is, it's atrocious. And so then the policy became don't ask, don't tell, don't pursue, don't harass, but people continued to be discharged. And even during my time, regular Army, I spent 3 years regular Army. I had additional deployments, as a National Guard member. But, I knew people who were discharged. I knew people who fell under investigation. I knew, it's like we all knew what was happening, and we just kind of like grabbed on and held on as best we could, and tried to support each other. But at the end of the day, like your support for each other was really limited. Otherwise, you'd lose your job too, and they knew that as well. I feel like, and you mentioned like back in the early 2000s, one of my acts of like resistance, was to write an encyclopedia article documenting like, here is the history of homosexuality, anti-homosexual policies in the military. Like I wrote a history of it. I wrote a 800-word history of what was happening, and saying how much it costs, how damaging it is to unit cohesion, national security, life and limb, all of these things. But nevertheless, the policy lasted until it was fully lifted, and so that it was signed in December 2010, and then October 1st of 2011 is when I could actually tell people, hey, I'm gay.
Well, I'm glad that day did come for you and for everybody else who's in the military and veterans as well who are LGBT. The gay purges that did happen, there was such an effort by the military to find anybody who was LGBT to process them out. These investigations were ridiculous. And between 1986 and 1990, there were almost 4,000 investigations on suspected homosexual active duty service members. And that led to just under 6,000 discharges. And the reason for that is because if they suspected you, they would totally do the good cop, bad cop thing. They would take the service member, put them in a room with no windows, and they would interrogate them. One officer would be saying, you know, you should cooperate with us. We're going to help you and make this easier on you. And the other person would be saying total derogatory things and saying, we're going to ruin your life. We're going to tell everybody in wherever your hometown is. We're going to tell your parents, you'll never get a job. Sign here for other than honorable discharge or worse. And then they would always put a really awful narrative on the DD 214. The impact on veterans who suffered through those fates, after even having to write a list of people that they suspected of being gay because they were so coerced, it was awful. And it still impacts them today. And the veterans I talk to, it usually takes multiple conversations with them to even get them to start talking about it. They don't want to be a veteran. They don't want to identify as a veteran. But these days, especially with the pandemic, they have nowhere else to turn oftentimes. And so they're reaching out and they're saying, hey, I've never tried to do this before. I've got an OTH or worse. I need help. And so then we start to uncover all this stuff. And then we realize there's a lot going on here. And another perfect example of a victim of a gay purge from the military, he was kicked out and he believes he was set up by somebody working with the military because he hooked up with somebody who said they were an officer, and the very next day he never heard from this person again. And then he was subsequently investigated and discharged and booted out with an honorable discharge 5 months shy of the 2-year requirement to have VA healthcare. And it changed his life forever. The goals and the vision that he had for himself, not only finishing his 4 years, but going beyond and doing things in security, were just totally diminished. So the impacts of these policies just go so far. And thank God for New York State, the Restoration of Honor Act that recognizes the fact that not only are these discriminatory policies and getting kicked out for being LGBT or your sexual orientation, gender identity, it's not always just that. The experience that you had as LGBT could have led to other things. Harassment could have led to substance abuse or an altercation with an officer, or somebody who outranked you, and then suddenly, or AWOL, like you mentioned earlier, Kristen. These are all things that impact your discharge as well. So the Restoration of Honor Act recognizes this. And we worked with some of the language on that to encourage that to be part of the thought process. So it's so robust, it's so inclusive. It's not only including people for SOG, sexual orientation, gender identity, it also includes MST and TBI and PTSD, because people realize now that mental health is a big component with the impacts of these policies.
No, absolutely. And it's, I mean, and often, like, you know, I mean, like, it's a discharge case may involve some, or if not all of those, you know, of those different points. Like, so, you know, the Restoration of Honor Act, you know, covering, you know, not just the anti-LGBTQ policies, but yeah, like the trauma. I mean, like, 'cause that's ultimately what we're talking about, because it, you know, again, you know, to reiterate, it's not, you know, like, this was rarely a cut and dry issue, where you know, the interrogation, you know, and under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, like sometimes this was like weeks or even months long investigations. I knew an Army captain who, you know, she was deployed in Afghanistan. She was on convoys. There was, you know, it was a highly kinetic, you know, deployment that she had. It was a hard job that she had, but she was under investigation for months, under accusations about her sexual orientation. And, you know, again, like under a policy that you're not supposed to harass, you're not supposed to pursue, you're not supposed to be witch hunting anybody, but they're, you know, like, she's aware that people are undermining her even as she's out there risking her life. And, you know, and just the, you know, and that's not even the most debilitating story, I mean, but it's something that even like just on a day-to-day basis, I remember, in my years of active duty, like it's just knowing that if somebody had it out for me, I was done. And I hid my relationships. I never ever dated anybody actually in the military, because I was so fearful. But it also like it takes a high personal toll, is that, in that if it's either you're choosing either I'm all military, I mean, like any relationship, that you have at whatever level of dating, you have to put somebody to the side, and like who wants that? Like what kind of relationship is that? It's terrible.
We're not quite there
yeah,
yet with the equality piece of all of this.
right.
And we're seeing it playing out. It depends on what command you're serving at. Fort Hood has had some really dark stuff going on lately. People getting murdered, service members.
Yeah.
Some of them are LGBT, and there's something not getting attention here that should be getting attention. On the other hand, we are seeing remarkable change here. Kristen, you went to an event this morning. Unfortunately, I was tied up and committed to something else, but you saw a really moving ceremony that you were telling me about earlier. That just marks another transition that we're getting in the right direction oftentimes. So do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, and also, just thinking about, like just in my own career, 17 years of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, being concerned, I'm going to be separated possibly negatively from, from military service that I'm proud of and that I've always, taken such value in, and from people who have supported me, and, even despite, policies that were really negative and harmful. It's, but to think back to October 1st, 2011, the first day that Don't Ask, Don't Tell wasn't in effect anymore. What's the difference between the last day of Don't Ask, Don't Tell and the first day that the policy was repealed? There was absolutely no difference. There was no difference from one day to the next. It's just, the threat is gone, the intimidation's gone, the injustice is just, gone away. And then I remember just feeling so angry and hurt by it all. And feeling like that was just, nobody really cared the whole time, but even though this was something that was, so traumatically affecting so many people. But to go today, this is like a rare in-person event for me to go to, but we were invited to see the change of responsibility for the New York City Army Recruiting Battalion down at Fort Hamilton. They cover a massive geographic area, and they've been, rated, the top Army recruiting battalion in the nation. They're also they're recruiting like the most diverse recruits into the Army as well, and that's something that they take great pride in. But to see an all-woman team, the outgoing sergeant major, was a woman with a long, distinguished career, and the incoming sergeant major is a woman, and the commanding officer is a woman, and they had like, all the companies out, standing in formation, in a socially distanced, like large, large drill hall situation, and we're all spaced out. So, we were all wearing masks, and so this is very socially distanced and safe. But, but to see the formation and just, an incredibly diverse formation as the Army is, and to see this all-woman team, and then it came time, for the speakers, for the commanding officer to speak, for the outgoing sergeant major to speak, and then the incoming sergeant major spoke. And she got up and, has had, 20 something years in service, and, and has this incredible resume, and is this like put together leader. And, and part of her, first speech to her troops is that, is to give greetings from her wife and to say, my wife, she can't be here today, but she sent you all a cake. She wants to make sure that she is going to be a tremendous support to all of you and to your families. And everyone's response was, "Who, Sergeant Major?" And to just think about that, these are the Army leaders that we've always needed. And to think that not so long ago, there was a time when that openness was not in any way possible. And I got choked up. Honestly, I got choked up about it. And just to see that the progress is happening. It doesn't mean that, the Army or that the military doesn't still have a lot to work on. But it's a really great day to get to see progress like that and to see the leaders who are making the change in our institutions by standing up and leading as who they are.
Absolutely. And it is so heartwarming to hear these stories, breaking down these barriers and the courage that the people who are breaking down the barriers have had for their entire lives. I just want to tell everybody there was a problem with the chat that we have resolved. We do have some questions that people do want to ask that haven't been able to.
Everyone's quiet. Everyone's
really
quiet.
I know. It's so quiet. I know, right? It's like we've been going for a little while with not a question, but yeah, people were emailing me. So we've taken care of that issue. So please do post your questions in the chat. We did have to disable mics and cameras just because of the fact that we've got a big group with us tonight. But while we're waiting for that to start coming in, the New York State bill that just got signed formally and put into effect by the governor on November 12th, for the Restoration of Honor Act. We've been putting in applications for close to 6 months before it actually is formally put into action for the Restoration of Honor Act. Just wonderful, wonderful legislation. So proud of New York for having this legislation. One of only 3 states, from what I know, there's Rhode Island and Connecticut who have similar legislation, but just really great to offer a second chance for people to get their honor restored. Anybody discharged with an other than honorable discharge. Could you just talk a little bit about DVS's role here and how this all came about and how this is working?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a great thing. So I've been on board with New York State DVS for a little over a year, and so so the governor signed into law on Veterans Day last year the Restoration of Honor Act, and it was a bill that was sponsored by State Senator Brad Hoylman, who's from Manhattan, and Dee Dee Barrett, who's in the Assembly, whose district I don't exactly remember where she got.
106.
In 106. Okay, and sorry to Assemblymember Barrett for not. I know she has a lot of diners in her district that she talks about, but but so it was it was great to see New York State legislators who are not veterans really taking up the cause and championing this, and for our governor to sign it into law and say, yes, this is absolutely needed. So he signed it into law last year, and so it was a 1-year period for DVS to recalibrate our resources to be able to manage this. So we had a year to ramp up, to start getting the word out, to readjust some of our staffing, so that we could manage the influx of applications. And so it went into effect on November 12th. So just last week, we sent out some of the very first determinations. So we had 7 that were received, processed, adjudicated. So the thing is, we don't send this out anywhere. This is a New York State process, and we manage it within our DVS appellate unit. What we do every day is we help veterans with their VA claims and accessing their state benefits. So we represent veterans before the VA. We have dozens of great veteran benefits advisors who are spread out all across New York State. And we work with our county veteran service offices and all of our government partners around the state, and getting everybody ramped up on all of this. But so we are managing cases every day. But so we dedicated some staff in our appellate unit to restoration of honor, and so we began taking in applications last June. And so we've been asking our community partners like SAGEVets and a number of other organizations that you all know in the city and as well as across the state to really get the word out, to let veterans know that this is something that exists for veterans who received other than honorable discharges or their equivalent from earlier days, like that undesirable discharge, or under during World War II it was blue paper or blue chip discharges, so other than honorable or general under honorable conditions. And so those are the discharges that we're able to take and look at, and we look at it like the liberal consideration, where we look at tell us the story of what happened and let us help to make the case that this was a result from either post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injury or military sexual trauma, or because of sexual orientation or gender identity. And so, or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. So it's, it's amazing to be part of telling the story that, even as we're waiting on that federal action that, like the legislation you mentioned, Ashton, that could open up a quicker, path to restoring honor at the federal level, getting those, there's been such advocacy over the last, 5 to 10 years on bad paper discharges, recognizing that there's been so much injustice done over history, but also even in our post 9/11 era, so many people have been discharged for reasons that were unjust, to include don't ask, don't tell, to include prior policies. But but pending any federal action, we as New York State have the ability now to say, let us look at your story. Let us look at potentially like the decades of trauma that you've had to sit with, and that you couldn't talk about. That said you were undesirable or other than honorable, or these horrible labels that you carry for a lifetime from this unjust discharge. Let us look at that, and we can determine that if it was for these reasons, then we, as New York State, we determine that your service was honorable for New York State purposes, and we will restore some 50 odd state benefits, and we can say you are now eligible for these that you weren't before. So it's so what we do is if we determine that the case meets the criteria, then our executive deputy director Joel Evans signs a letter and says your service was honorable for New York State purposes, and we've been training our New York State workforce to know that these letters are coming, and so that so that they can train their frontline staff that when you take your DD 214 and your restoration of honor determination to the DMV to get your veterans designation on your your New York State driver's license, that they understand what that is, and it's an official document from New York State that's recognized, so that you can get that changed. So we've been in the process of doing that training. We've reallocated staff to be managing these applications. So what I have to say to you is, please help us spread the word to veterans who are living with these bad paper discharges, because like you mentioned, Ashton, a lot of veterans, if they have that bad paper, if it's wrapped up in a history of trauma, if it's something that they feel shamed about, they may not even go to veteran spaces. They may not connect with veterans organizations. But you all on this line, you all may know some of them. And so, just spreading the word, and there's folks you may know who you may not know that they have an OTH or a general discharge. And so, so you can also ask the question, if something sounds to you like maybe they didn't get an honorable discharge, ask them if they'd be willing to apply for this. We want to talk to them. And so there's no shame in reaching out to us, because we want to hear from them. And even if it's a case where where it may not meet the criteria for restoration of honor, we still want to make sure that, if the veteran experienced sexual trauma during their military service, regardless of the discharge, you are entitled to services for the trauma that was inflicted on you for sexual trauma from the VA. So, you are entitled to go to a vet center. You are entitled to get VA care that is relevant to that military sexual trauma. And so, so this is stuff that we want to advocate for you on, because we want for every veteran to get everything that you are entitled to.
That's awesome. And this is like such great model legislation for other states to follow our lead, and we can track these outcomes and share these outcomes. We've had several veterans already fill out the application, and we've heard back from a couple that have had their honor restored, and it's such a cathartic experience. It doesn't change the federal classification, but this is such a powerful step. The fact that people are calling us and calling their legislators and finding out about it, saying, hey, I want my honor restored. I feel like I deserve this. And that is awesome. And that's what we want. We do have a question here. Evan Simone, Kristen, I'm going to read it what it says. Kristen, thank you so much for your insights. Your story highlights a major concern. It is estimated that over 1 million LGBTQ veterans have served. An important consequence of this is that many more vets may have been traumatized by identity concealment during service. Do you know if there is currently outreach to address their experiences, even if they were not discharged from the military? How can we reach this population? Great question, Evan.
That is a great question. And Ashton, we've talked about this, and talked with folks in New York and in some other places about DOD does, because nobody was you can say, here's how many discharges there were, or estimating the number of discharges, but because it wasn't part of the data collection process, we don't even know. That number, we can estimate, we can guess how many LGBTQ people have served, but to your point, because they were concealing their identity, we really have no idea. We have no idea. And also, with the VA's own data collection, the VA, although the VA is very proactively, seeking to serve LGBTQ individuals, the VA has, transgender health services. It has, LGBT coordinators at every single VA facility. This is an imperfect system, because the VA is vast and large, and it, there may be, different results at different locations, but the VA is trying to do the outreach, but a report just came out within the last week that the VA isn't even tracking how many veteran patients it has that are LGBTQ. I think, I've been getting care from the VA, and I don't recall that anybody's ever asked me about my, anything other than, my gender identifier. It is extremely relevant to trauma, to the sense of,
to giving you the appropriate health care. Hello, we've had this conversation before, it should be a natural part of the intake process. Not only will it normalize the fact that there are people in the VA who aren't cisgender and straight, there's a shocker. It would also help doctors determine what sort of care and treatment plan you need. This is just, it's cuckoo city. And, for all the veterans out there who have had a traumatic experience, you are not alone. The people that I talk to, the people that Kristen talks to, we hear these stories all the time, and I wish I didn't. But when they share these stories is when you really realize you're not alone. This has happened to countless people, and we have to work together to try to heal with each other. And the Restoration of Honor Act is a path in the right direction. I was going to say something. I lost it.
So the Center for New American Security did a study that was released in February of this year, that sought to assess the needs of women and minority veterans, and they included LGBTQ veterans in that study. But it's a needs assessment for New York State for women and minority veterans. And they conducted roundtables. They found all the existing data, and it wasn't a lot. It wasn't a lot of data that they could find, and it is documented that there is not enough data. But it's like really like to find ways to document needs, to start getting us on the map, data wise, for studies, for follow-on care, targeted care by the VA, to justify the VA having, different programs, for us to be seen as the veterans we are. It's really organizations like SAGEVets. Different LGBTQ organizations that do make space for their veterans, to identify them, and to include them in information dissemination and potential research studies that do come, because the VA is trying to serve us, but it's like this giant machine with an itty bitty steering wheel, right? And so it's as it tries to track to see us and to meet our needs. But and something that we've talked about also is how does LGBTQ identity and veterans factor into the suicide rates that we're seeing? How does it factor into substance use? How does it factor into incarceration rates? How does it factor into the negative outcomes that we know are tracked with bad paper? But because we were never a data point until 2011, is really, it's hard to really look back, unless you're looking at these past studies, like that past RAND study that I mentioned, that said, this cost half a billion dollars to get rid of people that you never needed to get rid of.
Such a waste of resources and talent and people that are dedicated to serving our country. Another question here from Michael. Given the limitations of concealing of identities, what do you do to find a sense of community?
The military for many years was, because I had, a breakage with my family in many ways, because of who I am, because, they're conservative and religious and not accepting. When I signed up for a reserve unit back in 1994, for 10 years, a reserve unit in New Orleans, Louisiana, they became my family. And I was never, that experience of Don't Ask, Don't Tell was, it was very real, but there were people there who looked out for me and protected me in many ways. Because they got how wrong it was. And I was really lucky in that way. And so I'm still in touch with some of those folks, and and they really helped me to become a grown-up and a better person and a leader. And every unit that I've served with, it might have had its hardships. As I progressed in rank, it got a lot lonelier, and it got a lot more. It's like the stakes went up, and I did have some negative stuff that I can tell stories for another day. But I did not have an easy time throughout my military service. But for every bad experience, for every person who's trying to get at me, there's been so many more who have been really a support to me, and have been some of the best professionals I've ever worked with, and some of the best people I've ever known. And and also trying to keep the mission first, right? So many shared experiences. And so I've the last 5 years or so, I've found my community with veterans. And and it feels like a family that I otherwise wouldn't really feel as deeply connected to.
I think I thank you for sharing that very internal and personal experience, Kristen. I think that there are certain limitations of concealing identities that we need to break down. We shouldn't feel like we have to do that. I've heard Benjamin Pomerantz, who was also part of the State Division of Veteran Services, say in some of his presentations that the military is sort of a social experiment. You take people from sometimes very rural areas where they've lived with nothing but white people who are all Christian, and suddenly they're thrown into Great Lakes, Waukegan, for boot camp and training, and then onto a ship or in the army or wherever they are sent off to. And suddenly they've got a very diverse group that they're working for, and you have to work together as a unit. And that's one of the things I really liked, was I got exposed to a lot of different people that I hadn't been around before. But it's not always like that. It just depends on your command, and it certainly depends on the policies that exist at the time. The fact that Don't Ask, Don't Tell did end is great. The trans ban, unfortunately, went back and after just a short 2 years. But again, it's just like we need to highlight and leverage some of these personal stories about these individuals so people get a sense of who we're talking about. We got the very first transgender veteran inducted into the New York State Senate Veterans Hall of Fame. That was announced on Veterans Day, and we couldn't be prouder. Vietnam veteran, so dedicated during just a powerful force and dedicated to the war. She volunteered to go to the war 4 times before they finally let her go. And as soon as she got there, she got injured in a vehicular accident. And they were trying to send her home. She's like, no, I'm not ready to go home. She was such a fighter. So we got that recognition. After her service, she got very involved. She said that the military basically radicalized her, but she is radicalized for social justice. It's not as if she's radicalized for doing something that's negatively impacting society. It's fighting for other people's rights. Always a soldier, just through and through. So I think that is very important to talk about these stories and some of the heroism that we hear here from these individuals. And the thought that before I lose this thought, they do. And Kristen, let me just add, because we sort of touched on this real briefly and I lost the thought. We're in a veteran space. Most of the people involved in tonight that signed up are also in the veteran space. But the people that we are needing to seek usually aren't in our circle. Right before the pandemic started, we had a whole campaign where we're going to be sending our brochures to libraries across the state. We had it all lined up and ready to go, and we actually sent them off to the Buffalo area. But then the pandemic happened. So it is up to us to try to start infiltrating places beyond our own safe space to try to reach out to veterans that we're not finding yet. Putting our voice out there in whatever virtual space that we can at this point, because we are operating in a virtual reality right now. But that's really important. And if that's one takeaway that we all have from this program, I would like to encourage people to start thinking about that.
Yeah, and but it's also like, it's hard. It's hard to tell personal stories. Like it's this I was thinking about it, and I speak at a lot of events. I've spoken on a lot of different issues. But this is only the 3rd event that I've spoken about my own personal story under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And again, it's not like I walk down the street and I frequently get harassed, because of my haircut or my choice of clothing, but like, I'm not hiding that, my lesbian identity in any way. But I generally don't speak about it because it is deeply personal, and it can feel really raw, even. And after and so I completely respect that. We do need spaces where sometimes it's just us, and that's okay, because it's been hard, and it still can be a tough time. And so I, absolutely, completely respect whatever anybody choose to do, where or when you choose to tell your story. But there's so many, like you said, Ashton, sometimes if you can't tell your own story, tell other people's story. I mean, even something I didn't mention is a lot of people don't realize that, the pioneer leader Harvey Milk, who was, a first in, an elected office in San Francisco, ended up being murdered for who he was. He was actually discharged from the Navy, and when he served, he was a diver, and he served after Korea, but he served in the I forget exactly what years he served, but he was an officer. He was a young officer, and there was a rumor about his sexual orientation, and he was asked to resign. And the Navy lost a tremendous leader, and the gay rights movement gained an incredible leader. And and in some ways, was perhaps that was part of what radicalized him to say, what, I am, here's who I am. If the military doesn't want me, someone's going to want me. And and I feel like more of those stories should get told, and also connected to that military service too. There's for every social justice fight, you're gonna find veterans in the crowd. It seems to me like the veterans always have the righteous anger to bring to these social movements.
It's very true. We are continuing to get the word out about the program, certainly about Restoration of Honor, about the great work that we're doing with DVS and the great work that you're doing independently. Can't say enough about our partnership. The fact that we're able to, I'm grateful that I can still operate the program, certainly not in the same robust fashion we were pre-March 13th. But we're doing it, and things take a little longer sometimes, and some of the providers we're working with are a little strained and take a little longer to get back to us, but we are making a difference for a lot of people. We want to continue this work. We want to highlight the Restoration of Honor Act. So let's put some contact information in the chat here so people do know how to reach us if there's questions about anything that we've discussed tonight. And certainly mark your calendars for December 22nd when we do part 2 of this and talk a little bit more about the history of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, the end of it, and where we're going to go forward with it.
Yeah. And also, I just want to acknowledge Mayo. Thank you so much for sharing what happened to you. And that was just an outrage, and it makes me feel rage for what happened to you. Also, the Restoration of Honor, it's something that, that I'm proud to take part of the implementation of. I'm one of the key people implementing Restoration of Honor for New York State DVS. And also just a note of fact is that Brad Hoylman, who was the lead sponsor in the Senate, he is gay, and his husband, I believe, served in the military. And so I also bristle when it feels like somebody's doing something for us, but there's a definite us to every piece of restoration of honor. And again, what folks who served in past eras, like I'm so sorry that happened to you. And I'm so sorry for all of the traumas that any of you have experienced. Even as we continue to address, like stories on CBS News just this week of sexual traumas inflicted on women and men in the military very recently are just, I've watched some of these videos from CBS and just wept. And I'm still trying to, it's hard. And none of this should have happened. And we have to keep working. And telling your story is part of how we make change. And supporting each other is how we get stronger. And as much as we can do to make change, to bring justice, to stop the traumas that keep happening in the midst of standing up to serve our country. There's been too much friendly fire, fratricide that has been tolerated within the ranks for far too long. And so, so thank you to everybody who's sharing your story in whatever way that you can. And thank you to everybody who is working to be part of the change. And again, thank you, Ashton, and everybody at SAGE who is, like, you all have created a community and spaces where we can talk about this in a real way. And like this, let's do it, y'all. Let's keep making change.
Yes, awesome, Kristen. Such a privilege to have done this program with you today. It's nice to work with you always. I wish I could give you a hug right now. It's just it's a battle. Yes, yes.
Group hug.
A virtual group hug, all of you. Oh my goodness. We do have work to do. Yes, equality is not a dirty word, people. It is not. So continue being heroes and heroines out there. We will fight the good fight until the bitter end. And if there are any more questions, please post it in the chat, because I think we're wrapping this up. And please join us on December 22nd. We will be in touch with you to remind you and send out the credentials and everything. And we would love for you to join us again. And Kristen, thanks again.
Type in my email in here. Inclusion@veterans.ny.gov is the easiest way to reach me. But thank you all so much. It means a lot to talk to our community about what's happened. So let's keep doing it.